with the rest of the world, and we are fortunate to have with us as our next speaker a member of the European Parliament, an expert in international trade, who has done enormous work for us in the Parliament, ensuring that our position on this is constantly reiterated. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please give a very warm welcome to William Dartmouth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually not I wasn't an expert on trade. I've had to make myself an expert on trade, and one of the things is that I'm more an expert than I've made myself more an expert than most other people, because what you hear is basically untrue. But I would first of all like to start by paying tribute to the late Malcolm Wood, my friend, your friend, and to so many of us, a mentor. It was Malcolm who began the Southwest UKIP Spring Rally here in the Great Hall of Exeter University. And it has now become the UKIP Spring Conference. And for sure, we've never had so many people attending a spring conference as are here today. Shimon Peres once said, "People age, dreams are ageless." Malcolm Wood is no longer with us, but his dream for the UK Independence Party is slowly but surely coming true. The establishment accuses UKIP of being negative. I reject this, but it's understandable that we just might be a little bit negative when we consider what's been going on to our country. We have become, as it were, flotsam and jetsam on a roaring river whose destination is a European superstate, none of which we have either asked for, voted for, sanctioned, or approved. But the time has now come for us to move on to the politics of positive, the politics of answer, the politics of the future, and that's why today I'm going to tell the truth about trade. Now, first of all, the EU's share of global wealth is in terminal decline. Its share of world GDP was in 1980 was more than 30%. It's about 20% now, and by 2050 is projected to be just 15%. Being in the EU is the economic equivalent of being chained to a dead man. We in the UK currently export more to the Republic of Ireland than we do to China. We must not, as a global nation, focus on the low-growth, dead-end markets of the EU. Worse still, while shackled to the EU, the UK cannot negotiate trade agreements with the fast-growing economies of the future in Asia and the Far East. We lost that ability and that right when we joined the common market in 1973, 40 years ago. We had to vacate our seat at the World Trade Organization. Worse, we had to renounce our trade agreements with Commonwealth countries. And it is those countries, the Commonwealth countries, that are expected in the next 5 years to grow at an annual rate of 7.3%. So thank you, Winston. By contrast, the economies of the EU are expected to grow hardly at all. The one thing that is growing in the EU and growing fast is unemployment. In Spain, a country which many of us here will have visited, youth unemployment is an astonishing 55% and rising. 6 weeks ago, the Prime Minister visited India at the head of what was described as a trade mission. In reality, a British Prime Minister is powerless to sign any trade agreement with India, or for that matter, with anyone anywhere. David Cameron was only making what in North America they call a howdy call. Just say howdy, that was it. Now, of course, we want to trade, and trade plentifully and profitably with EU countries. But we can trade with the EU without being a member of the EU. As Tim Congdon pointed out, all the 190 countries in the world trade with the EU. Indeed, 31 other countries actually have trade agreements with the EU. Now, Mexico has a trade agreement with the EU. It came into force in October 2000. Because of that trade agreement, Mexican exports to the EU pay an average tariff of just 0.39%. All Mexico's industrial exports to the EU, and more than 80% of its agricultural exports, enter the EU without tariffs. And that's Mexico in Central America. Now, South Korea, as you see there, has a trade agreement with the EU. This was signed in 2010. In consequence, South Korean car exports to the EU pay a tariff of just 5.3%. Nearly all South Korean textiles pay no tariffs at all. Now to EFTA. Now, only perhaps a few of us will remember EFTA, the European Free Trade Association. But EFTA still has 4 members: Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. And Switzerland is in the category of which I will talk about on its own, I'll talk about it a bit later. Now, the EFTA countries have big advantages over us in the UK as an EU member. They are exempt from the common external tariff and exempt from EU external trade policy. Moreover, and this is important, they as a group are free to conclude their own trade deals with other countries. For example, EFTA has trade agreements with Canada, a Commonwealth country. The EU does not, and in consequence, Britain does not. Moreover, the EFTA states are not subject to the Common Agricultural Policy, EU Criminal Justice and Asylum Policy, EU Foreign Policy and Defence, and the Common Fisheries Policy. Norwegian fishermen don't have to throw away their fish. However, there are negative aspects to EFTA. The 3 EFTA countries, apart from Switzerland, do make financial contributions to the EU. They have no representation in the decision-making bodies, but the big negative about EFTA from our point of view is that EFTA countries have to accept Article 45 of the Lisbon Treaty and associated articles in the other treaties which relate to the free movement of people. Indeed, the EFTA countries are all signatories to the border-free Schengen Agreement, something which we do not want here in the UK, such as we leave. Now, for Switzerland, which is a special case, if anybody tells you that we have to be in the EU to sell this to the EU, the killer statistic is this: Switzerland is not a member of the EU, but it still exports 4.5 times more per head of population to the EU countries than the UK, which is a member. Switzerland benefits from all of EFTA's trade agreements. In addition, it has the right to sign its own trade agreements. Switzerland has a trade agreement with Japan, while the EU has no such agreement. And never let anyone tell you that Britain needs to be part of a large trade bloc in order to sign trade agreements. It is just not true. In fact, it's the other way around. It's actually harder for a bloc of 27 different countries to negotiate trade agreements. There are 27 different economies and 20 different sets of economic priorities which all have to be met first. And the idea that the diverse countries of Europe need to bolt themselves together into an artificial political construct in order to negotiate trade deals with other countries is phony Europhile nonsense. But again, the big negative is that Switzerland has to accept the free movement of people, potential mass immigration, and that the Swiss are currently not liking at all. Now, the EU is a customs union, but a country can be in a customs union with the EU without being a member. And that is the agreement that the three micro countries, Andorra, Monaco and San Marino, currently have with the EU. There are big pluses. They are not subject to the rules of the EU single market. There is no free movement of people, and as with the EFTA countries, they are exempt from the common agricultural policy and the common fisheries policy. They also do not have to make financial contributions to the EU. And it doesn't say much for Britain's establishment politicians that arguably Andorra, Monaco, San Marino and Liechtenstein have a better trade deal with the EU than we do. Or to restate, it says a lot about the sheer incompetence of our establishment politicians that these micro countries have a better deal with the EU than we do. Now, there is another country that is in the EU customs union, as Professor Condon mentioned, and that country is Turkey. Turkey exports its industrial and processed agricultural goods to the EU with no tariffs, and has done so since 1996. And perhaps one day somebody will take David Cameron, Ed Miliband and Nick Clegg aside and gently explain that the UK is getting all the benefits that we reasonably can from trade with Turkey at the moment. And that is without conferring on 73 million Turkish citizens the right to live, work and settle in the United Kingdom, which is what has to happen should these gentlemen get their way and Turkey joins the EU. Now let's talk about Greenland. Greenland left the EU. It left the EU in 1985. It can be done, so we can do it too. So what happened to Greenland's trade with the EU? Greenland negotiated a trade agreement allowing it to sell its fish products, accounting for 90% of its entire export trade to the EU without bearing any tariffs. And there's also another compelling historic example, Russia. As we all know, the USSR fell apart, indeed broke up in 1991. It stopped being a country. And I'm sure you are now agog to know what then happened to the USSR's trade agreements. This is what happened. All the trade agreements that had been made with the former USSR were transferred, and transferred almost forthwith to the new country of Russia. Now I'm now going to show you 3 slides of 3 trading empires over the centuries. This is very familiar. The British Empire in 1921. And I'm simply asking you to note that the possessions are scattered. This is less familiar. The Venetian Empire in 1500. Again, the possessions are scattered. And finally, the Greco-Athenian Empire in 550 BC. Again, the possessions are scattered. And this is the point. The territories are not contiguous. They are not adjacent. They are not next door. The 21st century communications revolution has resulted in what a US author has called the death of distance. In fact, the phrase, the death of distance, is the title of an entire book. There is no reason, and this is the point, there is no reason at all, if there ever was, to be in a political union with our geographic neighbours. Geography is not destiny. To trade and trade successfully and profitably, we do not need to be part of a wannabe European superstate. our existing dysfunctional and economically damaging relationship with the EU for something new, based on friendship and free trade. And that new relationship must be fair, it must be profitable, and it must have our full consent. Since 1975, our cumulative trade deficit with the common market and its successor, the European Union, is an astonishing 538 billion sterling. They need us more than we need them. As I said earlier, and this is my final conclusion, UKIP has been accused of being negative, and I again reject that characterisation. But on the contrary, what we are putting forward, especially on trade, as well as other matters, is the politics of truth. And in so doing, we offer the politics of positive, the politics of hope, the politics of answer, the politics of dreams coming true. Mr. Chairman, that is what UKIP is all about.